Long time coming, and finally the Naval Academy is delivered. You've been to the Naval Academy before. Do you remember that? How was it?
I loved it there. Yeah, I do remember vividly. It's a great school.
I had dinner with Colonel Plata maybe a week ago, and she had a picture of you signing her book at the English Department Library with Professor Mark McWilliams.
Right. I remember them. I remember being really impressed with just what a great school it is. It's really an amazing place.
It's a special place. I just wrapped up my last semester here. I'm headed to the Naval War College for some follow-on education here. But it's been a great go.
Fantastic.
Okay, we're going to give it 2 more minutes so that we can start precisely at noon.
Okay.
Generally, I've got a couple passages from the things I carried, and then a couple maybe questions from the documentary as well.
Okay.
Really enjoyed that. And then I've listened to your Dead Reckoning podcast. Those guys are friends of mine. That was great. So
yeah, they're great guys.
I've used all that to kind of shape and inform this discussion. Hopefully it goes well. And then we'll give the mids an opportunity to ask a couple questions as well.
How did an infantry officer end up teaching English at the Naval Academy?
Isn't that a great question? I am the unicorn. I am the only Marine teaching English anywhere. And yes, to have an infantry Marine in the English department is unusual. I think it really came down to throwing shit at a wall. And I like to just throw some shit at a wall. And sometimes
oh, great.
Someone made a mistake, misread my application, and now I've been here for 2 years.
Wow, fantastic. I bet it's been a real education for the midshipmen.
It's been a mutual education, undoubtedly. My graduate studies at Georgetown were centered around moral injury, homecoming narratives, trauma narratives. So did all the Vietnam films and literature, and I teach an elective here called Literature of War, where
great.
Where I've taught your book, and then I taught a course called Reimagining Vietnam, where we focus on homecoming. And again, we read your book and we read The Sorrow of War kind of next to each other, Bao Ninh, Sorrow of War, and it's been great.
Yeah, I met him years and years ago in Vietnam, in Hanoi. He had 0 English and I had 0 Vietnamese, so it was an interesting meeting, but it was fun.
It feels there's a lot of parallels, obviously, and the overall feeling is, did anybody win? No, it's just mostly sad.
That's true.
Let's be military about this, and we'll start right on time. And appreciate you being here today. For those of us, we also have a separate live stream for a general larger audience. They won't be able to interact, but we've got people watching as well on the live stream. So most of these students here have read your book. I've had them in class, so we're well versed, I think, in who you are. Well, at least on a superficial level, and we're very excited to have you today. Let's jump right into the things they carried. In the very first chapter, you close that chapter with, but Lieutenant Jimmy Cross reminded himself that his obligation was not to be loved, but to lead. Can you tell us a little bit about what makes an effective leader and what makes someone worth following, in your opinion?
Yeah, there's so much. I can say a few things. One is to lead in the physical sense. That is, to do what you're asking your men to do, and to show that you are asking of yourself exactly what you're asking of your men, which means possibly die. Don't hang back, go down into a tunnel now and then, and don't just tell your men to do it. Walk point occasionally, and don't just tell your men to do it. It also means a kind of wisdom, knowing when an SOP is inappropriate in a given situation, even though it may be taught in infantry school at Fort Benning or at Annapolis or at West Point. There are times when SOPs are insane. You don't do it. And to recognize when an informal standard operating procedure has to be violated to get the mission done or to save a man's life or men's lives. And that requires a kind of wisdom, not a robot, follow the rules kind of mentality, but both a willingness and a capability of adapting and innovating when it's necessary to do so. There's nothing worse for an enlisted man than to be following an automaton into battle where lives are at stake. You want to be following a human being. That's the last thing I'll say is I think that officers have to recall that all the time that above anything, they are human beings, just like their men are, those under them. And not to let whatever the officer dumb go to your head. To recall that you are a human being, you can make mistakes, and to recognize when you do make a mistake and try to do something about it. Some of that may fly in the face of, I don't know, the military ethos, you know, that if your commander tells you to do something, you just salute and do it or so. And by and large, of course, enlisted men do just that. But you expect of your officers a certain humanity.
There's a heavy emphasis on hypocrisy there that you said if you ask someone to do something, maybe you should be willing to do it yourself. And so sometimes, you walk point, sometimes you go down in the tunnel. You touched on hypocrisy in your documentary, and you talked about trying to come up refining a bullet point list, and you had some back and forth with your wife. I found that part pretty funny.
Right.
And speaking of courage, Norman is trying to come home. He's home, but he's not really home, is he? You actually say he's stuck in an orbit at that point. What have you found as the best way to come back to Earth or to come home?
Well, I don't know. I went through it one time coming home from a war, and I did it my way. And it more or less worked, but it wasn't the standard way. My plane, after a year in Vietnam, where I was in combat most of the time, I got on a plane in Da Nang and flew back to Fort Lewis, Washington, where I processed my way out of the Army. It took about 10 hours or so, get a haircut. They give you a steak dinner. And then, I got on another airplane and flew to my home state of Minnesota. And while taking that civilian flight, I went into the back in the lavatory and took off my uniform and put on blue jeans and a sweater and a baseball cap and stuffed my uniform in my, little, we called them AWOL bags, a little black valise. And from that point on, no one knew I'd been a soldier. I never talked about it. I went to grad school at Harvard. Nobody asked me, what did you do before grad school? And I didn't talk about it. I stayed silent, as a lot of veterans do, especially combat veterans. You don't know what to say, what story to tell, where to start and where to end. And on top of that, nobody wants to hear about it anyway. So you shut up. And just don't speak. I was lucky in that I had writing as a way of kind of opening up a vent inside me and letting some of the emotion and the memories come out. Most guys don't have writing, and they stay silent. So I was fortunate to have that. I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't had the outlet of writing. I probably would have gone the route that a lot of combat veterans go. Too much drinking, bad marriages, being a little embittered, angry, as many Vietnam veterans ended up being, because they weren't treated the way we treat our veterans today, with honor and respect, and dignity, and all those sorts of things. It wasn't the case after the war in Vietnam. And my buddies felt slighted, and they felt abused, and they felt they weren't given the respect that they deserved, and they became bitter about it. Silence can be a dangerous thing. It's like you hold things inside long enough. It's like a pressure cooker in your head. And even now, though, these buddies of mine are 75 years old, some of them 80 years old, that stuff is still cooking in their heads decades and decades afterward, because they did stay so silent, even with their families. So in answer to your question, I don't know the best way to deal with it. I just know the way I did, through my writing.
I think we're all trying to figure that question out for ourselves. And along a kind of a similar line of thinking here is you've got a passage here that from Kiowa. He says he wished he could find some great sadness or even anger, but the emotion wasn't there. And then you, in another passage, you say, in this little field, I thought it swallowed so much, my best friend, my pride, my belief in myself as a man of some small dignity and courage. Still, it was hard to find any real emotion. It wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
I'd seemed to grow cold inside. You make that reference of growing cold a few times, and you said you can't feel, you've grown cold. What has helped you beyond writing to bring some of that warmth back to where there's cold?
Well, writing was a big part of it, but on top of that, I've got a wonderful, wonderful wife and 2 great kids. And that has helped more than anything. I came to fatherhood really late. As I mentioned, I'm 74 years old. I've got 2 young kids. They're both teenagers. One is going to be going to the University of Chicago in a couple of months, therefore the hat. And the other one will be a sophomore in high school. They have, by their questions and the way they have treated me, they've helped me open up a lot about the war, getting rid of some of that coldness. They don't press me. They know when I don't want to talk, and they know when I'm willing to talk. And they'll wait, and when they see that I'm in a pretty good mood, they'll ask a question or two. What was it like? That kind of question. And I usually try to answer with a little anecdote or a story. I try not to be abstract about it and talk in an abstract way. I do it through little stories I'll tell them. And by talking to my kids, it's loosened me up in a way that, it's pretty remarkable.
We talked a little bit about this already as well, but you said when you tell a war story, you say no one wants to hear it anyways. And speaking of courage, back to Norman on page 137. At one point, it says, "Well, how do you like to hear about the war?" Culturally, the percent of people who serve still hovers around 1%. And while the folks in Des Moines did not know, as you say, shit about shit, I think it's safe to say that most towns throughout our country still don't know. But then you write, they did not care to know. and that's kind of what we're just getting at. And can we make them care? Should we make them care? And why?
Well, I don't think you can make people care with abstract political, military rhetoric. I don't think that works. I do think stories work. If you tell a story that grabs somebody and they feel endangered, or they feel scared, or they feel happy to be alive after a firefight, and if you can get them to care about the characters in a story, that's the only way I've found of getting people to care. Something you said touches on one of my primary emotions about my war, and probably all wars really, is the hypocrisy of people who really, they don't have anything at stake in a war. They don't have, their sons are at Stanford or Harvard or, Texas Tech or whatever, sheltered from the war. There's no draft right now, so no one's life is on the line except those who volunteer. And as you mentioned, that's about, I think it's less than 1% of all the people in our country. So there's a tendency on people who have nothing at stake to stop caring. They've got to, go to their jobs and make money or go to school. And it's hard to care when it doesn't affect you personally. To break through that, I think the only thing that really does work, for me at least, is to tell a story that somehow you invest yourself when you're reading a story and you're into it, and it could be a movie, could be a book, but you get invested in a way that ordinarily we're not. The hypocrisy of people who don't care a lot about wars, don't follow the news, don't vote, and then go to their Kiwanis Club and spout bellicose, killing rhetoric. Let's go kill people. And then they don't go. And their sons and daughters don't go. There's something disgusting about that. And as much as I despised the draft back in my time, I'm coming around to it, that we do have to all play a part in some way or another in our country's wars, and not be automatically excluded from them. How we do that, I don't know, but I think it has to be done in some way or another.
There's definitely a potential benefit to everybody sharing some burden. It at least makes people pay attention a little bit more.
It does.
In How to Tell a True War Story, and then again in Ambush, you kind of share a similar sentiment. And a true war story is never moral. It does not instruct nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing things men have always done. If the story seems moral, don't believe it. Then you go on to write, it was entirely automatic. I did not hate the young man. I did not see him as the enemy. I did not ponder issues of morality or politics or military duty. There were no thoughts about the killing.
Mm-hmm.
We are in an environment at an institution that has an entire department dedicated to ethics, the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership. We do instruct and encourage virtue. We do suggest models of proper human behavior. Is this, in your opinion, time well spent? And what would you suggest if not, what would you suggest we do alternatively?
Oh, what a great question, and what a hard question. The quote that you read had to do with war itself is a nasty, disgusting, immoral thing. You point a weapon at somebody's head and you pull the trigger and you watch the brains come out. It's nasty. In civilian life, you wouldn't tolerate such a thing. You'd arrest them and put them in jail, maybe even execute people who do these sorts of things. and especially when they do it repetitively. We call these people serial killers. With the military, we call them warriors. It's a big difference in nomenclature. The physical act is identical. The question then becomes, when is violence justified? When is it necessary? When do we have to do it and there's no other recourse? Or is there such a time? That's the difference between serial killing and calling somebody a warrior. So that is a moral, ethical question. And that's the one that I presume that is being addressed at the Naval Academy and at West Point, and all for the better. So my point is not that we shouldn't try to act in a moral sort of way. We certainly should. We should think about what we do and ask the really hard questions. What is it? What is worth killing for? What is it? And what is worth dying for? The answers, unfortunately, to those kinds of questions among laymen are platitudinous. You fall back on platitudes. Oh, defend my country. The question is, what does that mean, to defend one's country? And defend how? Countries can be defended not just with military means, they can be defended in all kinds of other ways, can't they? There's a thing we call diplomacy. We pay our diplomats to do something that's not violent. That's their job, and it's a way of defending our country. Foreign aid is a way of defending a country, trying to help those in need, to stand up for our values as Americans. Violence is not the only way. The question, though, I'm sure that you're discussing in your moral and ethics classes at the Naval Academy, are the ones I want addressed, and I'm glad to hear you are.
I appreciate that. We're talking about warriors, and you're talking about the different instruments of power, and maybe don't always press the easy button, which is the M. Maybe sometimes you use the diplomacy, maybe sometimes you use the money. There's different instruments of power, but it does feel like when you are potentially over invested in one instrument, then you might be conveniently continue to press that button when every kind of situation arises.
Yeah. There's another issue too, Tom, that seems important to me is, does violence always work in a practical way? Does bombing the hell out of Vietnam, more bombs were dropped on Vietnam than all of the world during World War II. It's hard to believe, but true. Vietnam is the size of roughly California, and more tonnage was dropped on that little country, an impoverished country, subsistence level economy country. Did it practically work? That's the question. The idea basically was to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people, to convince them that democracy was the way and not communism. But when you bomb the shit out of a country for 10 years, pretty indiscriminately, I might add. Bombs are not like, weapons where you can aim them precisely at a target. And you end up killing children. In the end, 3 million Vietnamese died during that war. 3 million. That's a boatload of dead people. And some of those casualties were children and babies and teenagers and grandmas and grandpas. And that happens to a country practically. What do you think the effect would be if we did that to, say, Des Moines, Iowa, or San Jose, California? You'd have a lot of pissed off people. And in a practical way, you're not winning hearts and minds with indiscriminate destruction. You're doing exactly the opposite. You are manufacturing enemies. You are making them, like running them off an assembly line. So I'm not a pacifist, but I am a guy who thinks we ought to discriminate between the enemy and civilians in a practical sense, not even a moral sense, just purely practical. If you want to win a war, you don't piss off the people you're trying to help. And by piss off, that's an expression that's not adequate. If you're the father of a 6-year-old kid who's lying dead in your arms, something I actually witnessed in Vietnam, my company was encamped on a little rise, not quite a hill. You do a night defensive perimeter, you dig foxholes, and then at night you do a thing called H&I fire. We used to do. It's called harassment and interdiction fire, where you just sort of fire out into the dark enemy to keep them away. And we did that fairly regularly, almost all the time, in fact. And this one occasion, the next morning after that, we'd done our H&I fire. An old man came into our perimeter carrying the body of a little kid. And it was an accident. Nobody knew the kid was out there. A round had gone, like 700 meters or 500, and hit a kid by pure fluke in the head and killed him. And you can imagine what that old man was thinking. He was a pretty angry guy. He was the village Buddhist monk, as it turned out. He wasn't the father of the kid. The father was behind the monk. And that image has stuck with me. And I don't know how it would stick with anybody. We all felt horrible. We felt culpable. It wasn't intentional. It was just our military SOP. Shoot out into the dark. And that was the consequence. I don't think that helped win that war very much, if at all. I don't think it helped win it at all. But it was one of the events of the war that has stayed with me ever since and made me question the efficacy of violence. Yeah, sometimes it can work. But can you imagine right now in Afghanistan or Iraq, can you imagine Al Qaeda putting up their hands and saying, "We surrender, you won"? It's hard to picture any more than it was to picture Ho Chi Minh doing it or General Giap in my war. That I'm not sure violence is going to work in our current wars in the Middle East any better than it worked in Vietnam. I'm certainly not convinced it'll work.
So my kind of question then is the military the appropriate tool to win hearts and minds? Because as Clausewitz says, war is an extension by other means. And so that is a violent, coercive, a violent persuasion means. And so I'm all about kissing babies and giving out hugs and winning the hearts and minds. I just don't know if the Marine Corps infantry, whose mission is to locate, close with, and destroy an enemy by fire and maneuver, is the appropriate instrument or tool to apply towards hearts and minds. In the War and Peace of Tim O'Brien, you said current soldiers, talking about modern soldiers, we are focused on getting the job done, but the rectitude is absent. Can you unpack that a little bit, that idea that we get the job done, but that the rectitude is absent?
Well, yeah. Just on a daily, on-the-ground basis, we had no sense of purpose to the war. All we did was we were basically walking targets in the infantry. We would go from village to village. We could never find the enemy. The enemy always found us at their convenience. We were subject to ambushes, firefights from all kinds of directions. We would search villages and then leave the villages and then return a week later to the same village and do it all over again. Maybe somebody would die, maybe somebody would get wounded, and then we'd leave the village and come back a month later. It was not like World War II where we headed for Tokyo or we headed for Berlin, kind of a sense of destination. We didn't have that sense of destination or a sense of purpose. we essentially walked in circles, waiting to get shot at. So you can imagine in circumstances like that, you don't feel that you're accomplishing very much when you're returning to the same village time after time, or the same rice paddy, going through exactly the same thing repetitively, day after day. So there wasn't a sense of accomplishment. All the while, we were getting blown up by landmines, among many other things, much like in the Middle East now, where IEDs are one of the main killers. For us, it was the same thing, but called landmines. And all this frustration, it felt like the land was killing us. So once again, it didn't feel like we were accomplishing anything, because you can't shoot back at a landmine. It's already dead. You can't kill it. But it's blowing you up and taking off your legs and feet and all that sort of thing. It wasn't the John Wayne kind of war that we had grown up with in the movies. It was a chaotic and seemingly purposeless kind of combat. I don't even know if you guys could hear me. Can you? Oh, you can. Oh, okay.
I copy that the rectitude was absent in so much as, how do you shoot in a mine? How does it feel to go back to the same village to fight somebody else's war that was a week ago? Now it's your war, and then it'll be your war again next week. And there's no drive to Tokyo. Understood. I think some people on the line have probably this idea that we may be warriors, and in your sweetheart chapter, there's a line that says, "I feel close to myself when I'm out there at night. I feel close to my own body. I can feel my blood moving, my skin and my fingernails, everything. It's like I'm full of electricity and I'm glowing in the dark. I'm on fire almost. I'm burning away into nothing, but it doesn't matter because I know exactly who I am." You can't feel like that anywhere else. As someone who's had a similar experience, many of us, I think, tuning into this call specifically, probably have that inclination that we might be warriors as well, and that I think war provides us the medium then to test that hypothesis. Other writers have been more flattering. Other Vietnam War veteran writers have been a little bit more flattering about that experience. Webb specifically, but even at times Marlantis, about that feeling of satisfaction when you are good at something and alive at something and doing something that you feel like you might be called to do. You might have this thing called a warrior in you, and it's an old profession, and you only can really find out, I think, there in the fields of fire. And so they also, beyond the idea of the satisfaction feeling that I think is described here in the passage we looked at in your book, but they describe some redeeming moments in the midst of the waste. It's clear, it's waste, waste, waste. Wherever you look, it's waste. But there seems to be some more redeeming moments, like that. They feel like what they're doing matters, not on a grand scale, but on a micro level. But it mattered to someone who they cared about, someone who they respected, their fellow Marines. Is it possible to have these redemptive moments, these hopeful moments, and these moments of deep satisfaction while in combat?
Beyond any doubt, it's not only possible, it just happens. The feel of your boots in a rice paddy at midnight as you're walking towards some dangerous destination fills you with a kind of electricity. The smells all around you of the mildew and the mustiness of Vietnam fills you with your whole body with a kind of adrenaline, endorphin rush that can't be denied. Even if you're terrified, you've still got the adrenaline rush or the endorphin rush. The difficulty with this is that the consequence of it all is going to be death. Either you or your friends or the enemy or civilians. It's a death dealing occupation or profession. The word war means people killing. We don't call it people killing. We call it war. It's almost a euphemism. That's the problem. Yeah, you get the endorphin rush, and yeah, you get the satisfactions of doing your job. But the consequence of the satisfactions, in the end, the whole purpose of it all is people killing. So it's contradictory. On the one hand, you feel a certain pride at having comported yourself with some dignity under fire. You feel a certain pride at having shot back and not just laid there and done nothing. You feel a certain pride in making your body move, but every impulse is don't move. Curl up in a ball and never move ever again. But you do it. And afterwards, yeah, there's some pride that comes as a consequence of that. However, you also have to bear in mind that you're taking pride in something that has ended up in the deaths of other people. You're part of something that is a killing imperative. These are contradictory. So I'm trying not to be simplistic about it. On the one hand, you're bubbling with endorphins and this kind of combat rush. On the other hand, when it's over and you look at a dead friend lying there with no head or no legs, you're not thinking about pride, and you're not thinking about politics, and you're not thinking about democracy, and you're not thinking about the American way. You're thinking about how dead he is. That's all you're thinking about, nothing else. And that's contradictory to those feelings of pride. So war is this whole swirl of emotions, some of them positive and a lot of them negative. And I try not to be simplistic about it. I try to write about how contradictory it all is. War makes you a man, but war makes you dead. It's a line out of the things they carried. War is adventure. War is tragedy. War is boredom. 90% of the time, 99% of the time, you're bored out of your mind, sitting in the jungle, sweating, mosquitoes all around you, and you're bored silly. And then suddenly there's a gunfire behind you and your nuts fly up into your throat and you're squealing like a pig. That kind of boredom that's punctuated by that sort of thing. And then back to more of it. It's all this contradictory stuff. So my writing attempts to portray the complications and the contradictions, even inside myself and in my memories of the war. A couple of my best friends come from that war. That's a great thing to have. Guys who took my back and I took theirs. On the other hand, some of my friends are dead, and they've been dead for 50 years, a long time. So that's contradictory. So I guess my main pitch is, let's not simplify things, as so many of us do. I'm sure Tom, who's been in the same boat I've been in, knows it's not simplistic, knows the contradictions. Nothing seems black and white. It's all gray and swirling, even inside your own heads. And even your own emotions are constantly swirling. And my battle really is against simple-minded black and white portrayals of war, political, literary, and everywhere in between those two. Watch out for simplification. Watch out for black and white.
In The War and Peace of Tim O'Brien, you caution against the dangers of absolutism, which kind of is similar to this.
Very, very similar.
But it seems today that culturally, societally, we want, or we're trending towards painting things as black and white, or as simple, or as absolute. What are some of the what can you enumerate a little bit more on some of those dangers, and possibly what are some of the things that we can do to actually understand that things are a little bit more nuanced and not so absolute?
I don't know. You're absolutely right, Tom, that we do live in a society where it's become so polarized and so black and white, so divisive, that it scares me. And I'll admit, angers me. I find myself kind of yelling at my TV set every night when I turn on CNN and listen to those talking heads on both sides. It drives me bananas. Absolutism is not human. Chipmunks are absolutists, or squirrels, or snakes, or mosquitoes, but we're human. We have the power to recognize shades of black and shades of white merging into gray. The power to be thoughtful about the world we live in. And I think that this tendency toward black and white absolutism has to do with kind of a natural craving for simplicity. God, let the world be simple. Don't make me work so hard. Let it just be simple. Dear God, please. We crave it so much that I'm afraid we succumb to that craving and find ourselves satisfied with absolutes. If only the world were that way, we wouldn't even have to have classes in morality and in ethics. We wouldn't need them because the world would be simple. But we do need them. And we do need to think about those things.
Going back to the documentary, there's a line where you say it's more than ironic. It's a death sentence that I'll be remembered for the Vietnam War. What have you done, or what are you doing to appeal that death sentence? And does that sentiment suggest that someone else gets to write our stories?
Well, what am I doing now? Is I'm being a father, and I'm trying to be a good one, which means I'm not spending 12 or 15 hours a day at the computer anymore. I'm not so selfish in pursuing my ambitions as a writer that I find time to play catch with my kids and golf and talk with them and go to dinner at night and be decent person at the dinner table. My sights are lower than they used to be. That instead of caring so much about myself or my writing now, what I care about are these two boys of mine and their lives. And it's a sort of a giving over of myself to the well-being of my sons. That's what I'm really doing about it now. I talk to them about the same stuff I'm talking to you guys about right now, but I do it in a different kind of way. I do it through, telling anecdotes or stories. Here I feel a little bit like there's a pressure on me to like preach or be abstract, when what I really trust is a story. That night, what happened, that day, what happened. And that's the way I try to talk to my kids, through anecdotes and stories.
And what happens when we talked about maybe the way that we get people to pay attention is through story, but what happens when you said you've been trying to wage a war on war with words, but it's not effective. And that kind of reminds me, so you're trying to use words to tell stories, to get people to pay attention and to teach us these lessons. But by your account, it hasn't been effective. And it reminds me of one of the last passages here. Well, right now, she said, I'm not dead, but when I am, it's like, I don't know, I guess it's like being inside a book that no one's reading. And so it almost reminds me as if no one's reading the book, even and so even when people are reading your book, that's what you're lamenting about, is that they read your book and they say, oh, great, I went and enlisted. And you say, oh, wow. And so, if the way that we can get people to pay attention is through stories and through our anecdotes, but then when you've committed a whole life to using these words to tell these stories, where does it lead us when maybe people aren't getting the message or aren't paying attention, it would seem?
Well, I don't feel that I have to be a messenger or a preacher to anybody. If I tell a story, that's sufficient for me. Kurt Vonnegut once wrote, he was asked, are you an anti-war writer? And Vonnegut said, I could be no more an anti-war novelist than I could be an anti-glacier novelist. And that's kind of what I mean by the sense of failure. That humanity has not yet run out of reasons to kill people. We always come up with what seem to be really great reasons. Nobody goes to war for what they consider bad reasons. That would be stupid. So everybody goes to war for what they consider good reasons, including Al-Qaeda, including ISIS, including the VC, including Hitler. They all believed, they were wrong, many of them, but they believed it. And I don't think we're ever going to run out of reasons to kill. That's what I mean by that sense of futility. I think it's always going to be there. At least I know I've not succeeded in doing much to stop it. Since I was in Vietnam, we've gone to Panama for a war there. We fought, as you guys know, in the Middle East for what now, 15 years? I don't even know how long. Feels like half my life. And I don't see an end to it. On the other hand, what can you do? All you can do is bear witness to what you saw, what it did to you, what it did to the men around you, what it did to Vietnam and the civilians there. All you can do is bear witness, but I don't have any false hopes that it's going to ever, that my writing or anybody else's writing is ever going to do away with war. In that sense, maybe I'm cynical, or maybe I'm just realistic. I don't know which it is. One of the two.
Yeah, maybe a bit of both. And yeah, I guess, all you can do is bear witness. So as you bear witness to your sons through your anecdotes, and as they continue to inquire about your own experiences, my mom, she's a Chicago cop. She was pretty strict, but she had two hard rules. One was don't get a motorcycle, and two was don't join the military. I got two motorcycles and I crashed them both, and I joined the Marine Infantry. How does that conversation go at your home? And
my experience is identical. I rode a motorcycle through Europe, ended up going through a little town called Hersbruck outside Nuremberg, and it was raining, and my motorcycle on these cobblestones skidded, went up in the air and came down on top of me. I broke my shoulder, ended up in a German hospital. Oh God, what happened?
We've got you. I've got you. You ended up in the hospital in Germany.
How do I, my screen went away. Okay, if you can hear me, can you see me?
We can hear and see you.
Oh, okay. Well, I can hear you, but I can't see anything except my regular screen.
Okay.
So anyway, yeah, I crashed. I ended up, in my case, meeting a really cute German nurse. So that was fantastic in that hospital. And then I ended up like you in a war in the military. So our experiences are almost uncannily similar. In a way, looking back on my life now at my age, I feel I lost a lot to the war. My sense of naivete, my sense of the goodness in the world, but I gained a lot as well. I gained a certain strength to keep going when things looked impossible. In Vietnam, we called it, you just keep humping. Humping meant walk, not what you may think. And you just keep going, plodding on step after step. And that served me pretty well in my life. When things look dismal and things look grim, I just keep humping the same way I did in Vietnam, and that served me pretty damned well. I've learned to care about other people, especially the men around me in Vietnam has taught me that in my life afterward, that I will sacrifice myself for other people, including my children now. And I think that served me pretty well too. On the other hand, I can never lose the stench of warfare, the stench of dead bodies, the ugliness of it. How dead people are. Boy, are they dead. They're not prettied up in a coffin with cosmetics and, all the rest. They're just dead. And I carried that with me as well. The horrible costs of war that on the 4th of July and on Veterans Day, we tend to overlook. We don't talk much about the nastiness of death. Instead, we sing our patriotic songs full of glory, which flies in the face of such poets as Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon from World War I, and flies in the face of my own experience. War is not pretty, and it is not full of glory. It's full of horror and terror and the lifelong guilt afterward. When you look at a dead person and think, did my bullet kill that person? You'll never know, but you do wonder. Again, it's complicated, but that's war, and maybe that's life as well.
Yeah, I think the dance of the infantryman, that one step in front of another, and that's how you get through everything. That's how you get through your war, and that's how you get through life. And so we are at time, and so I really do appreciate your visit and your time here today.
Thank you.
We'll continue to bear witness, and Semper Fi, sir. Keep attacking, keep writing.
Good luck to all you midshipmen. I wish you really the best. You can find it's complicated, but I wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Found his screen. Hey, appreciate everybody. You guys have any follow-up questions, shoot them my way. Thanks. Keep attacking. Stay in the fight.